Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're peeling back the layers on one of the oldest questions about two of the world's most incredible stories, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. Are they just myths, or could there be something more hiding inside? For centuries, we've known them as these grand, epic myths, amazing tales of gods and demons, heroes and villains. But there's a really compelling argument that suggests they might be something else entirely, that they contain the echoes of a real historical past. So, you've got these two big ideas, right? On one side, you have the view of pure myth, that these are powerful religious stories, maybe moral allegories, but with no real basis in things that actually happened. But on the other side, there's this fascinating case for remembered history, the idea that a real historical core was so important that it was preserved through storytelling. And it's that second idea we're really going to dig into today. All right, so let's get right into it. To really wrap our heads around this, we've got to focus on one single, really powerful concept. And that term is remembered history. Now, this isn't about trying to prove that every single event happened exactly as it's written, with dates and times, not at all. It's more about searching for the memory of huge political shifts, the way society was structured, and real human experiences from a long-gone era, a memory that was later wrapped in the beautiful language of epic and theology. We're basically looking for the echoes of a real past. Okay, so any good historical investigation needs a timeline, right? I mean, if these events did happen, we have to establish when they could have happened. And what's so fascinating here is where the source material places this so-called epic age. It's not way back in the mists of the Indus Valley civilization. No, it's slotted right into the early Iron Age, somewhere between 1200 and 800 BCE. It fits perfectly right after the time when territorial kingdoms were first starting to emerge. And that's the key takeaway here. This time frame isn't some wild guess that conflicts with archaeology or logic. It's a plausible, coherent fit. The kinds of political struggles we see in the epics, well, they make perfect sense in this specific window of history. All right, now let's get to the really juicy stuff, the core evidence. What happens when you strip away the divine layers, the gods and the magic, and just look at the political story underneath? Let's start with the Ramayana. So, what does the Ramayana remember? It seems to remember a shaky, fragile, early monarchy. When you look past the divine stuff, what's the story really about? It's about anxiety over who gets the throne, political exile, pushing out into frontier lands, and making alliances with local groups while fighting rival kingdoms. This isn't just a fairy tale, it's practically a playbook for how states were built back in the Iron Age. And then you've got the Mahabharata, which shows you the flip side of that coin, brilliantly. This isn't just some big family drama. It's the remembered history of India's first large territorial state, the Kuru kingdom, literally tearing itself apart. It's a memory of what happens when royal rivalries spin out of control, leading to a massive, devastating war, and even environmental collapse. It's a textbook case of state failure. So the argument goes something like this. Later, religious traditions didn't just cook these incredibly complex political stories up out of nowhere. No way! They took stories that already mattered deeply to people, stories rooted in real, foundational events, and they preserved them, adding layers of theology over the centuries. Only something real could leave that kind of a powerful, lasting mark on a culture.
Okay, so that's the evidence from inside the epics, but how does this whole remembered history idea hold up when you put it on the world stage? How does it compare to other ancient civilizations?
First, let's be super clear about what this argument is not saying. Nobody's trying to prove exact dates for battles, or that divine acts are historical facts, or that the armies were literally millions strong. The goal here is about historical plausibility, not scriptural perfection. And this is where it all really comes together. Look at this. When we judge the Indian epics by the exact same historical standards we use for other foundational stories, like the tales of Homeric Greece or the founding of Israel, they check every single box. Poetic transmission? Yep. Divine layering? For sure. A plausible fit with archaeology and politics? Absolutely. And this leads to a really powerful conclusion from the source material. If we're willing to grant a historical core to all these other ancient stories, then to turn around and apply some super strict, different standard only to India's epics, well, that's not being a good skeptic. It's just being inconsistent. So let's bring it all home. We've looked at the timeline, the political core, the comparisons. What's the final verdict? What does it all mean to shift from seeing these as myth to seeing them as memory? Well, the evidence points to a conclusion that pretty much flips the whole common understanding right on its head. The Ramayana and Mahabharata, they aren't just myths that people later got confused and thought were history. Instead, they're the other way around. They are history,
real historical memories that were expressed through the only languages powerful enough to carry them across millennia: epic poetry and theology. They remember a specific time, a specific political shift in a specific place.
And thinking about it this way is actually incredibly helpful. It's not about pushing any one religious belief. It's about making history make more sense. It lets scholars seriously study these texts as historical sources. It lets tradition have its power without demanding we take everything literally. And most importantly, it helps a lost period of history find its own voice again.
So the biggest takeaway is right here. These stories aren't outside of history. In fact, according to this argument, they are how the memory of the early Indian Iron Age survived. They were the vessel.
And that leaves us with a pretty incredible final thought, doesn't it? If history can be preserved and passed down this way, wrapped in a story, it just makes you wonder what other truths about our past might be hiding in plain sight in the great stories we still tell ourselves today.